I'm here today with Dante Stewart. Dante is a speaker and writer whose work in the areas of race, religion, and politics has been featured on CNN and in the Washington Post, Christianity Today, Sojourners, The Witness, a Black Christian Collective, Comment, and elsewhere. He received his BA in sociology from Clemson University and is currently studying at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta. His new book, Shoutin' in the Fire, an American Epistle, releases next week from Convergent Books, an imprint of Penguin Random House. So Dante, thanks so much for joining us, and many congratulations on this first book.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. I'm excited to be with you. Excited.
No, same here. I think there's a lot of folks that are really, looking forward to this. I've had a chance to read it, and I just loved it. Very open and honest, and from the heart, and tells a compelling story. So I think a lot of folks will really see it that way.
Well, thank you, brother.
Well, before we get into the book, tell us a little bit more for people not familiar with you, just about your background and the other work that you do.
Yeah. What's crazy, Brian, is like, this is a question I've been getting like continually over and over. I guess this was what happens when you're a newbie. Or whatnot. It reminds me of like the big way in when me and my boy are walking up to campus. We got to go to the big way in. I got my loafers on that I write about. And so like I got to reintroduce myself continually to people. But I'm Dante Stewart. I live currently in Augusta, Georgia, where I am I'm on staff at the Tabernacle, the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church. I'm a minister. I'm a husband. I'm a father of two beautiful children. Me and my wife have been married now 7 years. We both met at Clemson. And so, what else? I'm a writer. As many people know, that's what I'm here for. I'm a writer. I love writing. So it's not just simply that I write, because it brings me things, but I legitimately love writing. I love something that Jason Reynolds just was recently talking about. There's nothing like the feeling of completion, of imagining something, putting it out, putting it on paper, and then completing it. Sometimes it takes you, one day. Sometimes it takes you a few hours. Sometimes it takes you months or maybe years to complete it. But there's nothing like being able to have something that is yours on the page that you've completed. So I'm an author now or whatnot. And I'm a student at Emory, and my background, my kind of research area right now is on Black text theory and theology, and I'll be doing my thesis on James Baldwin. Many people who follow me on social media or who are reading the book or have read the book will know that James Baldwin has been so formative in my own kind of thinking, along with so many other people. But James Baldwin has left an indelible stamp on my own kind of imagination or whatnot. And I'm from the South. I'm from South Carolina. I'm from the Black rural South, in between St. Matthews, South Carolina, Swansea, South Carolina, and Sandy Run. Church boy, growing up in the church, and now I'm still stuck in the church, and gladly so.
And that was your nickname, right?
Yeah,
Church boy was your nickname.
I'll never forget it. Yeah, I never forget it. And some of my boys, even to this day, like some of my boys still don't let me, let me live it down or something. And so in a sense, it was prophetic because, years later, I'm actually a minister. Years later, I'm actually in the church and involved in, theology and things like that. And so, it's a nickname, that I like. It's cool. It's cool. I ain't got no problems with it. Yeah.
Good. Well, if I could, I'd like to read a couple of the blurbs that other people have written about your book to give people a flavor of, how it's received.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, no, Jamar Tisby says, arresting prose, an emotional meditation on race, religion, and nation. In Stewart's boldly revealing stories of love, pain, and renewal, we find our own. And Kristen Kobes-Dumais says, a magnificent debut. If you read one book this year, make it this one. So that's pretty powerful.
Hey, that is. I was grateful. I was kind of shook when I started getting my endorsements back in. I was like real shook because I was like, some of my endorsers, funny story, some of my endorsers, I was like, hey, this book is like overtly religious. So like, hey, if you if you ain't comfortable with that, then, you're good. You ain't got to really, you ain't really got to, read it and things like that. I want to be mindful of kind of your space that you're in and things like that. But also, when you start asking people for endorsements, I mean, that's a courageous process to ask for endorsers, to ask them to read your book, to critically engage it, and to hopefully like it enough to offer some words for it. And so I was when they started coming in, bro, I was shook, bro, no lie.
And before we started the recording, you were mentioning that Christy Adams, who we just recently interviewed, was kind of helpful with you developing your book.
Oh yeah. Christy is my sister. That's family. Like, Christy is family. So much of who I am as a writer is a reflection of just our friendship and the ways in which, like, Christy always made herself available to read whatever, even when I was going through my book proposal process. And I was telling you earlier, that when I released my devotion in 2019, that Christy, I mean, she was like reading like early stuff from it and giving me feedback on it. And it's like, yo, I really like it and things like that. And I was like, you should have one of your students read it and see what they say. Cause that's who I want students to like it. I want us to like it, who are adults, but I also want to write something that students like as well. Just cause I was saying, I'm incredibly influenced by just the work of Jason Reynolds in that regard, or whatnot, of really, giving young people the pen and allowing them to tell their story. And so trying to write something that they can, relate with, that's relevant to them. And so Chrissy would do that, and it was good, and things like that. But then when I was going through my book proposal process, I'd be like texting Chrissy, be like, yo, you like this? Maybe not, things like that. And she would kind of put me on game about like the process and things like that. And so, like, yeah, Christy is family. She is fam. She big sister for real though.
Well, you're a role model, and a lot of things that you talk about in that book are things that a lot of other kids are going to go through. So, I think it'll be really helpful for them.
Yeah, I hope, no lie. I really do hope, like, especially that section on womb, when I was talking with my student, I even as I was approaching writing my book, I didn't, I had to rewrite so many things, in that process of like revisions and things like that. And so there were things that my editor, Ashley, we talked about and was like, yo, yeah, this would work, this may not work, and things like that. And one of the things I really wanted to write on was that, like, I wanted to first and foremost write a Black book. Like, I wanted my book to be a book that would be like, it would be hard. Like, I wanted to write a book that would be hard to characterize as like simply anti-racist text, in a sense of like educating white people. So like teaching white people how to be less racist, and more moral and loving and things like that. And so I wanted to write something that was first and foremost a Black text that took our lives seriously. So I'm incredibly informed by Terry Ann Williamson, who wrote the incredible book, Scandamize My Name. I think it was like Black Feminist Practice and Black Social Life, and the Making of Black Social Life. And one of the things she entitled her introduction, one of the things that stuck out was the title of her introduction, which was titled Back to Living Again. And one of the things that she brought up is she was like, offering a critique for Afro, kind of a critique, but, a broadening, maybe. I would say a broadening. It wasn't necessarily a critique, but it was, but a broadening in the sense of Afro pessimism and things like that, regarding, ideas of, social death, and when it comes to Black studies and things like that, and challenging notions of, regarding Black life and how we make a life and how we live life beyond, the logics and the litmus of whiteness and white supremacy. And one of the things she brought up in this introduction called Back to Living Again is that, she said that our Black lives, the way we make the world, our world making as Black people, is as much a starting point as any other place. And for me as a writer, I wanted to take seriously that reality, particularly about the lives of young Black people. I'm a young Black person. I'm only 29. I ain't, I mean, I'm not seasoned just yet, and I think there's something to be said about, the courage and the willingness to be 29 and the audacity to write a memoir at 29. Like, when they came out with my, the genre of your book, and they genred my book and it said memoir, and I was like, what kind of audacity does a 29-year-old have writing a memoir? Like, you ain't, like my grandma say, you ain't lived enough yet. You ain't lived enough. Whatnot. But like, I feel like, that I wanted to write something that took seriously young Black people's lives, and I would be a writer that people will walk away and say like, yo, like he really wrote in ways, he thought of in ways that that was something that I wanted to read. And it very much for me, this book is something I would have wanted to read in so many of those formative moments that I wish I would have had. But like they say, hindsight is 20/20, and you can't really change it.
Well, I think a lot of white people are going to benefit from it too, honestly, because they need to hear.
Oh yeah, I think so.
They need to hear your story.
Yeah, I think so.
And what people like you've gone through. So I mean,
yeah. And that's the thing. Like, even when I was going through the process of developing an audience, it's like I use this metaphor a lot. When I was even in meetings with publishers, I was like, imagine me as a writer throwing a pebble in a pond. I have where I'm aiming and I'm going to hit that point, but the feeling, the effect of that throwing of that pebble is going to reverberate outward in concentric circles.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was writing for young Black people, in particular, Black people in general, but young Black people in particular like me. And I felt like, this book will reverberate out. I mean, white people will have sections, that they're able to read and be like, wow, like learn and think.
Yeah.
Right in their frameworks. People who are not Christian will be able to read and be like, yo, I dig that. I mean, people who are teachers going to be able to read this and be like, yeah, like, wow, I resonate with that. People who are preachers, people who in law enforcement, people who professors, people who are writers, people who are activists and on the street, people who got kids, young people who feel like they're being stifled. Like, I felt like, I wrote a very particular story, a very subjective narrative, but I do think in that subjectivity is a certain type of universality of writing that I think can generate resonance within a broader audience, of which, white people, I think, will be a part of.
So how did the book come about? How did you get started? What motivated you to do it? Because it's obviously a lot of work.
You're right, bro. It is a lot of work. It's a lot more work than I anticipated. And the crazy part is, many people don't know this. I haven't even shared this, on any of the interviews I've done leading up to this just yet. Because what's crazy is, like, not a lot of people ask me about craft. They ask me about content, which I like talking content. I'm cool with talking content and things like that. Because that's what we're here to talk about. Let's talk about the contents of the book. But I do think there's something to be said about like crafting and things like that. And I don't know thank you for asking that about how that book came to be. And so much of it came out of, the writing that I was already doing, I was already writing from like 2016. But I mean, so much of my writing began to change. I began to get better as a writer, get better as a reader, I get better frameworks for interpreting my experience and talking about theology and talking about the country and reading Black literature and meeting writers and things like that. And, living, whatnot, and talking with my wife and my friends, so much things was working on kind of broadening my framework of understanding and kind of, helping me evolve, as a person, as a preacher, as a thinker, as a writer. But I did not anticipate the hard work. Many people don't know this. I wrote my book while going to school full time.
Really?
I revised my book while going to school full time. And then even in the process, I got COVID in the process last year.
My.
And and it threw off my process. And so on that hard work part, like it really took it out of me. And to write memoir is a very hard genre to write in, because like you not only do you have to have good content and range, and this is one of the criticisms, that I love that one of my favorite book people had of my book. You know, I was like, yeah, I can't disagree with that, because I felt that when I was reading my audiobook. It's like, you know, that the sort of type of, you know, when it comes to metaphors and imageries and symbolism and crafting, you know, a sort of redundancy, you know, and I felt that, and as a writer, I want to get better at that, of, you know, having the writerly range. You know, it takes a lot of range to write a memoir, but it doesn't just take range. Like, you got to craft that narrative like real tight and very creative, you know, a very compelling narrative, a very vulnerable and honest narrative, and things like that. And so, it was hard work, or whatnot. And it just, and in some sense, you know, the book happened through just practice and practice and practice and practice. So it grew out of so much of essays that I had wrote in the past, essays that I was working on that never got released, that got rejected. I mean, there were sections in this book that got rejected by publications, or whatnot, that needed work. I needed work, and I need to get better as a writer and as a thinker, and put it in, you know, narrative and coherent frameworks. And so it really grew out of so much of my anger and failure and fears and insecurities, but also it grew out of my courage and my potential. I grew out of my own thinking and reading and things like that. And that's probably how I would think about how Shoutin in the Fire came to be.
Well, in the book, you write that it was as freeing as it was fear-inducing to write the book.
Yes,
so talk about that a little bit, if you could.
Yeah. When you talk about memoir, once again, back to memoir as a genre, it is a very vulnerable process. And I'm even nervous to this day. Like, I was on the phone with my mom this morning. She kept asking me about the book. I'm like, Mom, I sent you the book. Like, I sent you the PDF. You should have it in your email, you know, and things like that. And I'm like, why are you asking me about this book so much? You know, like what you afraid of? Like,
it's a
big deal. I mean, it is a big deal. It's a big deal. Yeah, it is a big
especially
deal.
for a mom.
Yeah, it is a big deal. I ain't gonna lie. But my mama was one of the type of people. Well, also, like, you know, all right, let me make sure, let me see what you wrote about, you know, let me make sure, you know, and things like that, make sure you straight. And so that's probably like, you know, kind of my fear in some sense, you know, is that I don't want to write anything, you know, that will hurt somebody else. When you talk about writing memoir, bro, you got to write a vulnerable story. You got to write an honest story. And I'll never forget reading this in Elizabeth Alexander's text. It was really two texts, really three texts that shaped how I wrote my book, and why I wrote it the way I wrote it. Elizabeth Alexander's The Black Interior, where, and I'll talk a little bit, you know, very quickly about how they shape how I wrote my book, especially in response to your question about fear and freeing and freedom. You know, Elizabeth Alexander has a section in her book, The Black Interior, where she talks about writing stories. And she's like, you know, I write the story. I'm the one with the story, and I write it, and I let everybody else deal with it in the process. You know, you deal with it the way you deal with it, but this story is mine. These are my memories. This is what I remember. And alluding to Toni Morrison and the beautiful ways Toni Morrison talks about memory in that book, in her Tanner lecture, The Site of Memory. Where she talks about Black autobiography. And if people haven't read that, it's just a brilliant text that I actually ended up including in that section on my granddaddy, on memory. And then Kiese Layman's Heavy, an American memoir, which, you know, he starts off the book, I wanted to write a lie. And you see this kind of honest, vulnerable courage of a Black man being willing to put his story out in the world to say, you know, I'm giving you something that I don't even know how to deal with. And so, like, I knew that I needed to write my book that way, that I needed to, you know, put my story out in the world in ways, you know, that I may not have made sense of just yet, and things like that. But then also Jasmine Ward's Men We Reap, which is another memoir, and the way that she humanizes her characters. And even though it's memoir, I do think that every memoir also has the kind of feelings of a fiction text when it comes to creating holistic characters that have flesh and fears and dreams and complexities, and beauty and creativity, who are very human. And so Jasmine really helped me think about, okay, how do I write about these characters in my text, and even myself, in ways that I don't heroize us, but that I humanize us.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you kind of wonder to yourself in the book is, how do I be Black and Christian and American at the same time? That kind of felt to me like the theme of the overall book. Is that the way you see it too?
Yeah. I think that is, as a preacher, me and my pastor always literally, every week with every text he preaches that we're working through, we always ask the relevant question. What is the relevant question of the sermon? Mm-hmm. And as people listen to sermons, that's a great way to think about how to comprehend, and things like that, or comprehend a text. If I read any type of text, I want to ask, what is the relevant question of this text, whether that's a biblical text, whether that's a piece of literature, whether that's a speech, what is the relevant question? And so I think, that sits at the heart of the relevant question that I'm asking of myself, asking of other people, asking of the country, asking of the church. Because, nobody in this text go unscathed, in a sense, not even myself.
No, you're tough on yourself.
Yeah. Who haunted by that question. Yeah.
So here's one excerpt from the book that I thought was really, compelling, quite frankly. It says, white supremacy was not just about terrible American men in white hoods with white crosses. It was also about the terrible ways I learned how to harm Black people and be terrible to Black people and not listen to Black people and not cry over Black people and not care about Black people and do it in the name of Jesus. I believe that white people were the center of my world. I believe that every other person's value is determined by them. I believe Black people must be the cause of our own pain and our own death. So, wow. I mean, number one. And number two, how did you learn, I'll use that word, to change that view? And how can white people learn from your experience of doing that?
Yeah, I'll start with the first question, and then I'll go to the second question. I'll go to the first question. I think in some sense, bro, like that, like, I don't even know how to answer that question, about what can white people learn? Because I'm like, there's been centuries of, opportunities to learn. And I'm like, what have white people not seen that they had an opportunity to learn from and done and not had an opportunity to learn from? And so, like, I don't know what that can teach white people, because at the end of the day, that's just not a person that I was that's not a demographic that I was trying to help wade through questions. So I wasn't really necessarily considering, what white people can learn, as much as, even when I talk about white supremacy in the book and whiteness, so much of my conversation about white supremacy and whiteness is interior conversation. It's not the way, well, I don't want to act like I'm a novice at this, because so much of how I thought about my own stuff is so rooted in what other people have said, about race and religion and politics and Black life. But so much of the kind of ways that I was talking about white supremacy and white people was almost reminiscent. I tried to be reminiscent of the ways Baldwin talked about society with his nephew in The Fire Next Time, where he's talking about, these people are your long lost brothers. These people, these people, are doing this. This is what they did. This is who they are. This is this. This is that. He's not telling his nephew like, yo, like, he's not sugarcoating the conversation, but he's talking about that conversation in ways that are familiar to his nephew, especially as it relates to how we experience the world of whiteness that has been created and that we have all inherited, and that in some sense, that many people have justified and protected. And so, even when I was talking about, white supremacy and whiteness in my experience, I was really thinking about, the question of, what can young Black people, what can Black people learn, from this experience, or whatnot. And in some sense, I think white people can learn from experiences, but I'm not really into white education, because white education has not led to re-education, in some sense. I'm reminded of Martin Luther King's famous quote in Where Do We Go From Here, where he says, that frankly, it must be frankly said, that white people are not putting in a similar effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. There's a sense of their superiority that they believe that the white people of this country believe they have so little to learn. And I, in some sense, was Martin Luther King simply talking about, as Paulo Freire would say in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, was he simply talking about banking type of learning where, you learn some history, you learn some dates, you learn some people, and now you got that information stored into your head? Or was Martin King reminiscent of Freire's conversation on liberationist understanding and humanizing understanding of education as, we want to transform the way life takes form? So I'm not really, in some sense, as much concerned with that second question in a sense of being able, to answer that in ways that have not been sufficiently answered in the past. And so I'll then move to the first question, what did I learn? How did I change? So much of it is reflective of the kind of self-critical work that's necessary to any type of process of growth. Through friendships and most of all through my marriage, I was able to kind of see myself in ways that I either was afraid to see myself, didn't have the framework to see myself, or in ways that I evaded because it was going to cost me too much. And what I was trying to achieve for myself, even in some sense, even sacrificing my own humanity, sacrificing my own marriage, sacrificing my friendships and the likes. And so much of my evolution and understanding is rooted in my relationship with my wife and her being able to, see me and say things to me that other people, may have said, behind my back, or may have said amongst themselves, but didn't either know how to say it to me, didn't know how we was going to respond. Because, at the end of the day, I didn't always respond in the right way to critiques of myself. A lot of times my first response, as so many of us, is, to fight, to fight that, and to fight whatever people were saying to me. So like in that situation with my friend Michaela, when Michaela tells me, Stu, you don't have a damn thing to offer Black people.
Yeah.
My knee-jerk reaction is not to think about that on the way home, but to go home and complain to my wife. And my wife tell me, you're always listening to other people when I've been telling you this the whole time. And, I that's so much of the way I've changed, but also, it took a lot of courage to face myself and what I had become and what, being in white social spaces and white religious spaces had made me, and even what I made myself because of my investment in those spaces. On the one hand, we could say that, those spaces were alluring. But also, we can say that we oftentimes as young Black people, and particularly I'm thinking about young Black males, and even more, I'm thinking about young Black males who play sports in college. We oftentimes, being in proximity to whiteness represents so much of the acceptance and the acclaim and even, the healing that we seek for ourselves. And too often that healing is laid on the altar, is sacrificed on the altar of our own humanity. That oftentimes we believe that we can be healed and celebrated and accepted in places, that we know that struggle to see us as fully human and worthy of celebration and love and protection. And so, it took a heavy dose of courage to face myself. But, as I write about, when I started reading more, it led to me broadening my frameworks and understanding. So I truly believe that literacy and liberation go hand in hand.
Yeah, isn't that the case? Maybe we could just kind of close up by what would be like the one thing that you would want people to take away from the book?
Wow. Yeah, I think one of the things, that first and foremost, this might be a little vain, a little selfish, but, by the time people finish the book, I wanted them to, say like, wow, this dude can write. Like that was one of my main goals. No lie, bro. Like I want people to know that I'm a writer. Like I truly believe, that I write myself into that role, into that self-understanding. That's what, if you see my schedule every day, I ask myself, what is the person going to do? What is the person I want to become going to accomplish today? And I write down somebody who's healthy and fit, somebody who's a husband and father. Somebody who's a writer, somebody who's a student and a scholar, somebody who's a pastor and a leader. And I list the three practices or three things that I want to accomplish in any given day in those roles. And so for me, I truly believe that I want to become a writer, whether somebody believes that I'm a writer or not, or whether, everybody judges that differently, who they believe to be writers or not. But, by the time people got to the end, I want people to say, like, wow, this is an incredibly, incredibly, incredibly written book, a very patient book in a sense of like narrative, plot, and structure that like you can feel the worlds that I'm trying to create. So like I was trying to approach my text as like a fiction text in the sense of as a writer. So like as the way N.K. Jemisin does, or the way Robert Jones or Disha Filyar, Maurice Ruffin, or Mateo, or Hanif Abdul-Rakib, or Jason, or Kiese, or Kathy Park Hong, and Vietnam Nguyen, like these incredible, incredible, incredible writers, Ta-Nehisi Coates and many others, like the way they build worlds. And I'm even thinking right now, like I've been reading Honoré Fanon Jeffers' joint, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and just the world building that's inside of that text, or something like N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became. I wanted to build certain type of worlds within my own text, and I want people to say, like, yo, that dude can write. But then secondly, I think I want people to walk away, really realizing, that we Black people don't have to be perfect, or in performance or in pain to be loved and cherished, and for our worlds and our lives to be taken seriously and to be embraced and to be free. And so I wanted to write something that was hella Black. Like I wanted the lingo to be Black. I wanted the feeling. I wanted the food and the words and the rooms to be hella Black. But I also wanted to write something that was, hella Black, but also humbly Christian. I wanted to write something that was theologically astute. And so I want people to walk away realizing like, yo, not only is this dude a really good up and coming writer, but this dude is a particular type of writer who really loves Black people. And make Black stories as beautiful as they possibly can be. But lastly, what I hope people take away from this text is to press into their own stories with a certain type of honesty and vulnerability and creativity that we know our stories possess. I am truly a firm believer, like Toni Morrison say, that our lives are already artful, that it's just waiting for us to make art with it. Our lives are already alive. We are, as June Jordan would say in her famous poem, Black alive and looking back at you. And so what does it mean to be alive and looking back at another person? And to realize that for me to be looking back at you is to say that I see certain things in the world, that I have a particular perspective that is sacred and beautiful and should be told. And I want people to walk away from this text realizing that, yo, there are places in our lives where we fail, and we need to be honest about that. There are places in our lives where we're terrible. We need to be honest about that. But there are also places in our lives where we have been courageous in ways that we have never believed before. And that story, that courageous, vulnerable, rigorous, beautiful, ugly, messy, loving, liberating, sacred, holy story is worth telling again and again and again and again.
For certain. Well, I think you accomplished those things. So congratulations. And I know you're in the throes of introducing a new book, but is it too early for you to talk about anything in the future?
It might be a little too early, because in some sense, like, it ain't really. I mean, of course, I'm working on book number 2 mentally, or whatnot. I have like a concept, I got a name and a chapter outline and things like that. So I'm working on that right.
So maybe you could tell folks where they should go find the book.
Yeah. I mean, you can go on my website, DantéCstewart.com. You can go to Penguin's page, to the book page on Penguin. But it's pretty much, it should be, hopefully, Lord willing, everywhere books are sold. Go to your local Barnes & Noble or your local independent bookstore. Definitely support, wherever you are at, definitely support your local independent bookstore. And if they don't have my book in there, go in there and ask them for some copies. Go in there and you order it from there, so they can know about it. We really cherish local independent bookstores around here. And I think that'll be dope. That'll help me out. That'll help you out. That'll help the bookstore out. We're all in here to help one another whatnot. So,
sure. Yeah. Well, good. Well, Dante, congratulations again on this new book. I mean, it's a fine piece of work. I think it's going to do incredibly well. And, best wishes with the rest of the launch and everything from there.
Thank you, Brother Brian. It's been great with you, brother.
All right. Thanks so much.
For sure.